So in this section here, we have just finished out the Declaration of Independence, at which each one of these men who wrote it, signed it, and are participating in it would have been declared traitors from their homeland. And now we get into a period of government which we call the critical period, because they really were in between governments. It was very possible that anarchy could have ensued. It's very possible that the whole thing could have fallen apart. Had they not bonded together and worked as a team, who knows what could have happened. The British could have just wiped them out. The French may have come in and taken over, and we would be not here right now. So I would call it the critical period.
If you speak French and you eat crepes right now.
Well, that's possible. Sure.
Eating crepes.
So one of the first tasks that we have to do is figure out what type of government are we going to include and what type are we going to put together. That's where Articles of Confederation come into play. And when the Articles of Confederation were put together, they required that all states had to ratify this. Why do you suppose that was? Jacob?
Because they just come out of a place where really none of the states were happy, and they wanted to ensure that everyone was.
Okay, good idea. Any other thoughts on why they required all 13 to ratify and to sign this agreement? For the first government, the Articles of Confederation. Maddie?
They'd already dealt with like a bunch of division and just like fought for their independence, so they wanted to make sure we didn't have to do that.
Very good. Yeah, and I think both of those do really sum that up, because they didn't want one of the states to think they're not being included and not join in, or to believe that we're just jumping into the same frying pan that we're in with the British. We want to have everybody together. We want unity among that. Now, beyond that, we also have Articles of Confederation did not have a strong centralized government, because it was Confederacy. The states themselves had to make the major choices, and so in order to do that, you had to have everybody in agreement. Maryland finally approves. They're the last one to put their stamp of approval on the Articles of Confederation. So how would you sum up these articles? What was the government like in the Articles of Confederation? Or maybe how was it different from what we have today? How would it be different? Jacob?
It was more like the United Nations, where each person has their own set of rules, and then they kind of work together in economics and things like that.
Yeah.
Instead of how we are today, it's the federal government and we have some autonomy.
Yes. So because of that, it's a loose-knit organization of, we agree to be on the same team, but we're all going to do our own thing. Does that work on the soccer field? We're wearing the same jersey, but we all want to score goals. I mean, I see you two guys right here. You guys are both primarily defensive players, right? Okay. So last night I was watching you guys. Your main objective was not to score the go-ahead goal. Although it would have been awesome had you kicked it from your position on the field. That would have been sweet. But your main objective was to keep the other team from scoring, right? So when we think about a team and the way that it functions, everybody has a defined role and everybody has a place on that team. The Articles of Confederation didn't really work that way. How do we know that's true? How do we know the Articles of Confederation was every man, every state for themselves? Isaac?
Because they all regulated their own taxes and
Okay.
trading between states.
Yeah. What are some other examples or other evidences we have that they just kind of did their own thing? Jacob? What? Shays Rebellion. Yeah. So for those that don't remember or didn't take U.S. history, what's Shays Rebellion? Luke?
Some farmer named Shay got a bunch of other farmers and they had a riot.
Okay. And what was the evident problem when that riot occurred that showed a weakness in the Articles.
There was no, like,
No way to put down this uprising on a national level. And what did the states that were not affected by this rebellion say? Your problem, you deal with it. Okay? So, again, it's kind of like, we go back to the soccer illustration, and, Luke's back there right now. Tonight you guys play pretty good team from what I understand, right? So, who's their best player? You guys know? No? Okay. Yeah, I don't know.
It's a guy from
So,
Australian name probably. They got a bunch of
so their number one goal scorer, he gets on a breakaway, and Luke starts chasing him down, and he sees Cole coming out of the goal to contest him, and Luke just stops. He's like, okay, not my problem anymore. He's inside the penalty box, so Cole, good luck, man. You just, it's one, yeah, you be set on the bench pretty quickly. And Alexa's up here, he plays on the attack and on offense, and he's back there watching defensive guys, and man, yeah, you better do your job. Same thing, he better do his job up in the front. Everybody's got a job to do in order for that to be successful. If you're all doing your own thing, it's not going to work together, and the Articles of Confederation proved that with the colonies here, especially Shays' Rebellion being the glaring problem there, when the other ones, other colonies just say, nope, not our deal. We don't want to have to help you out with that. We look at the structure of the Articles of Confederation. It was unicameral. There was one house and only one branch of government. They had a Congress, and that was it. There was no president. There was no judicial branch. It was Congress. That was it, and they met sporadically. So they did have a presiding officer of that Congress that was elected from among themselves, almost like a prime minister, but he didn't really have any extra power other than just the ability to call a meeting and organize, and he ran the meetings. So we get to the powers of this Congress. They had a number of them. I'm just going to throw a few out there. You can find the rest of them in your book. But they had the ability to declare war. So that was a power that the congressional members had and could do. But beyond that, they couldn't get everybody organized. They could make treaties. So on behalf of all colonies, if they voted in favor of making treaties, they could do that. They could borrow and issue money. That was a power granted to them in the Articles of Confederation, should they need additional funds. They could build a navy. They had the power to activate state militias. So they didn't really put in there that they had the power to raise a national army, but they could activate individual state militias. And again, this was part of the issue that became a problem with Shays' Rebellion, where they wanted more to be involved in that, but most of the states said no. Jacob?
How do you spell militia?
Militia. So while they had these powers, they had a difficulty enforcing these powers. Yeah.
So you could say they less had powers and more had influence.
Okay, I like that. Yeah, they had influence, maybe not power. Because you'll notice that there's a major lack of what do we do if the people don't follow what we tell them to do? How do we enforce it? Because there was nothing that they really had the ability to enforce those laws. Jacob?
So why did the central government have the power to build a navy, but not like any other type of army? When most of the colonies were already on the board, like the sea.
I think because of the financial cost involved in that most of the states in and of themselves were not going to build their own navy. And those that were inland, they'd never contribute toward a navy. They wouldn't see a purpose in it because they have a buffer of, for instance, if you've got Vermont, maybe Vermont. Were they in there at that point?
It was the
No, they weren't. Yeah, they were part of New York, yeah. So I'm trying to think of one that was not right on the border that wouldn't have had any touch on the, they all did, didn't they? Yeah. Because originally I was thinking Pennsylvania, but they still have access to water. So they still, what'd you say? Just build a wall. I like your cross-history viewpoint there. Yeah. Contextualization. Well done. No, so there were some states that would have valued that or had the finances to be able to put money toward a Navy, but not other states that wouldn't have. So that's my suspicion. I guess I can't say that for sure, but that would be my understanding. Yeah.
Were the state militias viewed as the form of a unified military, or did they go in place of one, or were they just simply state militias that were like, well, if we need something, here it is?
Yeah. So a lot of them were, if you think about like our National Guard that we have today, where they have other jobs. Many of them were farmers and businessmen, and most of them did not have full-time military at the disposal of the states. And so it was more or less a volunteer militia for a lot of them. Now that's going to progress to where they do have full-time soldiers soon, but then they would just call them up and say, hey, we need 10,000 men. Hey, let's go. And it was something that we don't see a lot today of, hey, let's go, let's do it for the sake of protecting our homeland. Everybody they jump in and they do it. Today, if we called for 10,000 volunteers from the state of Indiana, we'd be like, oh, do I have to? Are you going to go? Or, like, what? We'd kind of drag our feet a little bit more on that than perhaps they did back then. Yep.
I have a question about the state militia.
Yeah.
So was the federal government's power there, was it kind of like the governor, how they could call in the National Guard, but they're not really over the National Guard?
Yeah. And it was more of a request. And so the state, so the federal government or the Congress could say, hey, we want members from every militia to join in this. And then the individual governor of the state could say yes or no. Yeah, we're going to support that. No, we're not. It was kind of up to themselves because the states held sovereignty and they held the power to be able to do what they wanted to. So that's a big problem here, and we're going to see that being a wide open gap in the Articles of Confederation. The states did have some obligations. They had to obey acts of Congress. So they had to provide troops and money when it was requested of Congress, just as we mentioned here. However, there weren't really any consequences if you didn't. And you guys all know, because you guys like to test boundaries of rules, when there's no consequence for things, do we see the value or is there a motivation? And a lot of times you guys want to test, and I say you guys, but I'm the same way. We want to find out, okay, what happens if I don't? Well, nothing. Okay, then I don't. And we know how that works, and that's kind of how the states are recognizing here some of these acts of Congress is, I'm not really going to do that. Full faith and credit. So the states were supposed to recognize the acts and the decisions made by other states and recognize those within their own for things that would cross over the border. So today we use full faith and credit for things like driver's licenses. Now they didn't have driver's licenses back then, but this is an easy example for us to understand today. You get a driver's license in the state of Indiana, it's good in all 50 states. Okay, so they had other things like that that they would recognize and honor because they were a citizen of a particular state. It would carry over there. Now, that doesn't apply to certain laws that they would put in there, but things that would help for citizens to be able to cross from state to state would definitely be involved in there. Clearly, we've talked about some weaknesses in here. Every state gets one vote. Why would I mention that as a weakness? Every state gets one vote. Why is that a bad thing? Isaac?
Because
does the small states that have a lot smaller population carry the same weight as the ones with a larger population?
Yeah. So doesn't matter how big or small you are, everybody gets the equal amount of representation in the Congress and equal say in how that goes. So you have a really small state with a low population, very few people there, their weight in their vote actually matters more than the state that has the highest population, a state like Virginia. They felt like their vote wasn't counted as much. There's no national taxes. And I think somebody brought that up either in this class or the other class that that could have been a strategic move because of the taxation issue that we saw from Great Britain. Yeah.
With the one state, one vote system, since that was based off like the people elected those officials.
Yes. Yes.
That's why when they originally made the House of Representatives and the Senate, that the Senate, even though they're all the same number of votes, it was elected by the state itself and not the people of the state.
I don't know for sure. It sounds plausible, but I don't have anything to refute that or to say that's not why that happened. That's definitely a decent thought, but I've never really dug into that. I'll be honest. I don't know whether that was intentional or not. So I'm sure they had a reason for it. That could have been one of the reasons there, but I can't say for sure. But good thought. So no national taxes in there. No way to enforce the laws. And to me, this is the biggest thing, is that when you don't have a way to enforce your laws, then why have them? I mean, there's that whole idea of, well, good people are going to obey the laws to be good people. That only goes so far. There has to be consequence, and there has to be a way to enforce those laws. Otherwise, it's going to break down. There's no national court system. So every state would do their own court judicial system the way that they believe they need to interpret the laws that were on the books. This also made sure that when there was a disagreement among the states, if New York disagrees with Virginia on something, there's no mediator between the two. No way to settle that dispute according to the Articles of Confederation. You're just going to have to work it out on your own. And those of you that have siblings know that when mom or dad says work it out on your own, it rarely ever gets worked out, right? Maybe your parents never did that to you. My parents did that to me. And we just kind of say, I don't like you, you don't like me, okay, let's go. They had to have unanimous vote to amend the articles. So all 13 had to sign off in order to make any sort of changes to this. And then it was really entitled more of a league of friendship than it was a binding agreement. If they're going to pass new laws that would apply to multiple states, you had to have 9 out of 13 that would agree to that. So any amendment required unanimous vote. Any sort of new laws required 9 out of 13. I'm not going to spend much time here on divisions. We've already kind of talked about Shays' Rebellion. That's more of a U.S. history thing, and just for sake of time today, excuse me, I'd invite you to read through that section of your book a little bit more on that. The Treaty of Paris, of course, that ends the Revolutionary War, and we get peace with Great Britain at the end of that. And once we get to the Treaty of Paris here, we get to the point where the governments look at each other, the state governments kind of look at each other and say, okay, now what? I really believe there were a lot of them that didn't really believe that they were going to be able to accomplish this. And then once it's all done, now the real work begins of how do we work together and how do we make this new government work? We can't focus on the crisis of the British anymore because they're done. Now we got to focus on building ourselves a nation. This is why it's so critical in this period. We get here to creating the Constitution, Roman numeral number 4. And clearly there are some weaknesses in the articles. We get to the point where we understand that they're no longer going to be a viable option for us. And so they put together go back here. They put together a meeting at Independence Hall. Where is Independence Hall? Good, Philadelphia. That'd be a great field trip, though, by the way. Anybody know how far Philly is? Cheesesteaks. We can what? 11 and a half, 12? Okay. So, as they get together in Independence Hall, we have a very qualified delegation. In the people who are meeting, there are 8 men who signed the Declaration of Independence, 8 that had previously served in constitutional conventions, 7 who had been governors. There were 31 college graduates, which for that day was a pretty big deal. It still is a big deal today. There were 39 former members of the original Continental Congress. 2 of the members were college presidents. 3 of them were college professors. There are 2 future presidents of the United States, 1 future vice president, 17 future senators, 11 future members of the House of Representatives. Most of these men were men of wealth and prestige, and a lot of them were lawyers, had legal experience. So most of these men were upper class, wealthy, had an influence on the government, and so it goes back to my question earlier, was this change brought about by the people, or was it a government-mandated change? And I don't know that I really have a good answer for you on that. And I don't know if any of your opinions have changed or if any of you have any additional thoughts on that. But I think it's an interesting question to ponder. Jacob?
So would we be able to tell through articles and news stories, like you look at Thomas Paine, right before the Revolutionary War, and he was just complaining about the government. Whether if it was really by the government and not by the people, would there just be a lot of complaining and stuff that we could find?
I would agree. I would think you would see a lot more of that there would be outcry. I think, and I guess I tend to land on, it was government mandated, but the people were in support of it, which seems to kind of split the difference between both sides a little bit, because you don't see that outcry when the Constitution is put into place. You don't see any kind of major pushback against it from the people. It's kind of one of those things of, okay, I see the benefits of it. It's a little bit like when we change rules around here. If we can explain the reasoning for it, and we can give you an answer of here's why, a lot of times that calms down the sense of frustration more so than if you just say, oh, here's a new rule, deal with it. And at least that's the way I work. And so some of you have come and asked me about some of the rule changes, and I've tried to tell you and give you an answer as best I can, because I appreciate that when that happens to me. So anyway, going back here to the change, James Madison is the father of the Constitution. It's his influence that has a major impact on this. Now, he was not alone. There were many others that helped him, but it's important that you associate James Madison with the Constitution and Thomas Jefferson more so with the Declaration of Independence. A lot of times students get those confused, and they forget which one is which. So Jefferson goes with the Declaration, James Madison with the Constitution. James Madison was the one who took most of the notes in the meetings, and so therefore, as they compiled them all together, that's why they give him the credit for that. So when we look at the procedure and organization here, George Washington is appointed the first president. I think we all know that. He was elected by unanimous decision there. Some of the rules of procedure, I don't know if we really need to go into rules of procedure on this. I think we can probably skip through that. The question they asked was, do we really need to amend or replace the articles? And it comes down to the point where they decide that the articles were just not being effective, that it was not working. We needed to come up with something totally brand new. So, when they present to the delegates, we're going to come up with a brand new plan. Immediately, there are two plans that are put out on the table. There's a Virginia plan and a New Jersey plan. So this group over here, you guys are Virginia, and you're going to represent the delegates of Virginia. And I'm going to give you a few minutes here. I want you to research and find out what are the parts, the key elements of Virginia plan, and why are they so important to you, and why are you going to fight for them. This group over here, you guys are the delegates from New Jersey. And so you're going to research, you're going to find out what was in the New Jersey plan. What are you proposing? You guys here, you're in the middle. You guys are actually going to represent Connecticut, and you're going to come up with you're going to research what was in the compromise that eventually becomes part of the Constitution. So in these groups, I want you to talk through, discuss what was involved in this, why is it important, and I'll give you a few minutes here to come up with a few key ideas, and then we're going to debate and discuss which ones are the most important and why.